Hello and welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Games Workshop have just announced they are bringing back their Fortified Manor terrain kit. I will link to the Warhammer community article about it in the video description below. As far as I'm concerned, it's one of the best terrain pieces Games Workshop have ever made. I absolutely love mine, use it all the time, and I always thought it was a shame others couldn't get it. So, seeing it make a triumphant return along with a range of other terrain packs is fantastic. Anyway, many years ago, when I only had a few thousand subscribers here on the channel and I was still trying to get comfortable talking on camera, I put together several painting videos and reviews for the Manor kit, and I thought this was the perfect time to roll out a supercut of those videos. Be warned, these are old videos, but while they may be a bit rough, I think there is still some useful content in them that I thought was worth revisiting. So, let's get to it. Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Many moons ago, I received the Games Workshop Fortified Manor as a gift, and I assembled it and painted it up at the time, but I was never really happy with it. So recently, I spray painted it completely grey to start again, and that's what I'm going to do in this video. I've taken just the small outhouse building for now, and that's what I'm going to work on as I figure out the colour scheme that I will then apply to the whole building. And I've used a grey spray prime because that's what I had a lot of. I could have sprayed it black if I really wanted to. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to apply Avalon Sunset to the areas of the building that are plaster. And I'm using a paint scheme that I half-inched off of a website I found off of a blog. It looked like a really good way of painting the plaster. So to start with, we're putting on Avalon Sunset, and I'm going to apply 2 coats. I'm not worrying about thinning it down or anything too much, just making sure that I've got a good even coat and that I'm not clogging up any of the details like the cracks in the plaster. And I'm not being too neat at the moment. It's going to get a lot messier before it looks neat. So not worrying about the stonework and things like that. And then I'm using Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to splodge Agrax Earthshade over all of the Avalon Sunset. And again, I'm not worrying about being neat, I'm not worrying about it pooling, I'm not worrying about getting over the stonework. It really doesn't matter as long as I've got a good coating over all of the yellow areas. And then I'm using Mornfang Brown, and I'm watering it down about 50% because this is what it said to do in the article that I found, and I am splotching it on in random areas for colour variation. And now I'm switching to Skeleton Bone, and I am going to dry brush all of the plaster areas in large circular motions using a large brush. And this is going to take lots and lots of coats of dry brushing as we gradually build up the colour. The first time you do it, it's not going to look very good, but you just keep going until you get a really nice sort of mottled plaster finish. I think in the end, I did maybe 6 thin dry brush coats over the whole thing. It might have been 5. But you'll sort of get the general idea of when it looks good, when it looks done. Just keep going till then. And then I'm going to switch to White Scar just to do a final dry brush, and this is going to be mainly on the edges and on any large open areas, just to brighten it up a little bit and really define those corners. And that will be the plaster finished. We're now switching to Mechanica Standard Grey because we need to neaten up those stones at the base where we've gone over it with our dry brush and our washes, and also I need to paint in the stone lintels on the windows. And then I'm going to switch to Leather Brown, and I'm going to paint all of the wood areas. So that's the big wooden door, the sides of the window frames, the beams across the outside of the house, and also I am going to paint all of the tiles as well. The tiles will not end up brown, but they are going to get a base coat of brown to start working from. And I'm using leather brown here from Army Painter, but any mid-tone, quite warm brown colour will do nicely. And of course we're going to use lead belcher for all of the metal elements. So that's these rows of spikes that are in the windows, but there are also there's the door handle, there are the hinges on the door, and there are metal studs on the door and around the outside of the building. So anything metal gets a coat of lead belcher. Being careful not to splash it over things we've already painted. And then we're going to use Nuln Oil. Nuln Oil will go over all of the metal elements, because that's a standard thing to do with metal elements, give them a Nuln Oil wash. But I'm also going to apply it over all of the stone areas, so the stone lintels and the brickwork around the base. And then I'm going to switch to Ulthuan Grey, and I'm going to do a heavy dry brush over all of the stone areas to bring out all of the nice detailing on those stones. So that's also going to go on the lintels around the windows. And then I'm switching to Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to apply that to all of the wooden areas to bring out the detailing there. And I'm also going to apply it to the roof to bring out all of the deep recess shading there. Don't need to be too careful about it at this point. We've got a lot of colours to go over the top of it. I'm now switching to Monster Brown, and I'm going to heavily dry brush the roof with Monster Brown. And I'm going against the flow of the tile, so I'm picking out the edges and leaving the top parts of the tile untouched. I'm now switching to Mephiston Red, and I'm going to do the same thing again, applying Mephiston Red over those tiles. It's not going to look very good at this point, but there are a few more things we need to do to these tiles just to tie all these colours together. But I'm just making sure I'm getting all of those edges. I'm now applying red tone. That's going to go all over the tiles, and it will redden up the browns, and it will also make the reds more vibrant and bring the colours together a little bit, so we get more of a cohesive look rather than half red, half brown. And then I'm going to use Lava Orange, and I'm going to do another dry brush again against the grain of the tiles to pick out the edges and brighten them up, so we get a nice red look on those tiles. And that will actually finish this piece. So not a very difficult thing to do, quite a simple colour scheme. And I have to say, I'm pretty happy with that, and I'm happy enough that I'm going to apply it to the main building and do the whole thing. Hey everybody, Wonder Always Bored, Never Boring. I like having really nicely painted miniatures, but I will settle for painted miniatures, and when it comes to terrain, you usually end up with lots of large elements that you need to paint, and it can get a little bit boring, a little bit repetitive, so I like to look for the quickest, dirtiest ways possible to paint terrain, and today I'm going to show you some really quick ways that I have painted some walls and fences. We are starting with this wall, which is a Games Workshop wall from the old Fortified Manor set, and we are applying Nuln Oil over a spray of uniform grey. That's an Army Painter uniform grey, so no other painting involved there. If you haven't got a coloured spray primer, you can use Mechanica Standard Grey over Chaos Black. And when the Nuln Oil is completely dry, I'm just going to do a really heavy Ulthuan Grey dry brush. I'm going to build it up over a couple of dry brushes, just really going to pick out those edges. It's going to be sort of like a quite high contrast thing, so you've got really dark shading and then the really bright highlights. And I'm going over the whole thing. And that is pretty much going to finish this wall off. It's going to be that quick, that simple. We're just going to do a few extra details on the grass and the tombstone, because as you can see, Games Workshop slipped in a sneaky skull even on this wall because they can't help themselves. We're going to deal with that using white scar, and again we're just dry brushing, and I'm dry brushing in circular motions. I'm using a smaller dry brush this time so as not to go over the wall and everything else, but just using circular motions, making sure I don't go all the way down to the bottom so we get a nice gradation from the darker grey to the lighter grey. And that will finish that. And then we're going to do the grass, so we're going to use a dark green skin I'm going to layer that all over. 2 coats will do that. And you can use any dark green you have. I'm using Army Painter stuff here, but you don't have to. And then we're going to do an Agrax Earthshade wash over the whole thing. That's just going to go into the recesses, pick out the details, make it look like there is earth between the blades of grass as well. And we just have to be careful not to get it on any of the grey stuff that we've already painted. But we do want to get it right up to the base of the wall. And then I'm going to use Goblin Green, and I'm just going to do a dry brush highlight over the grass with Goblin Green. And again, you can use any light green that you have available. And that's actually going to finish this piece. That piece is completely done. Very quick, very simple. So we're going to move on to another example where I've already done the wall. And again, that was just Army Painter spray, Nuln Oil highlight. We're going to do the fence here. We're going to start with leather brown. We're going to apply a coat of leather brown. 2 coats, in fact, 2 thin coats to get a nice coverage of leather brown. You just have to make sure you get into all of the little spaces because you don't want any of your undercoat showing through. And of course, when you get to the edges, you need to be careful not to go over the wall that you have already painted. I'm then using Agrax Earthshade just to do the shading and the definition. Again, we don't want to get it over the walls, but we want to make sure we've got a good coating over the whole thing. And then I'm switching to Monster Brown, and I'm just going to do a highlight of Monster Brown over all of that wood. And then that's going to finish that fence. Apart from there's some little metal hooks on the posts that are going to get done with lead belcher and then a little Nuln Oil just to give them some definition. Finally, we're going to do this woven wicker fence. So again, we have spray painted with Army Painter Uniform Grey for the base coat. And then we're going to apply Avalon Sunset. We don't need to be too careful about this, but we're just going to make sure we get a good coat. One may do it, but you may need a second coat if you're a little bit patchy. It doesn't matter too much if it's patchy because of what we're going to do with it afterwards. But just make sure you've covered the whole thing and there's no grey showing. We're then using Agrax Earthshade. Because, you know, it's Agrax Earthshade. You use it for everything. And we're just going to slop that on. Again, we don't need to worry too much about pooling. We don't need to worry about being neat. We just need to make sure that we've got a coating over the whole thing. And when it's dry, I've got to say, Agrax Earthshade over Avalon Sunset looks great. We're now switching to Skeleton Bone, and we're going to do a heavy dry brush over the whole thing. Just going to build up that colour, lighten it up. Obviously, the dark areas will stay dark because of the dry brushing process. And that will basically finish that wicker fence. Very quick, very, very easy. And it means you can get this stuff done in a matter of minutes. You spend more time waiting for washes to dry than you do actually painting anything. We're just going to do the tree next to it. So we're going to do an oak brown base coat. You can see that I've already done the rock and the little chain morning star hanging off of it. You may need 2 coats of this, and any dark brown will do. And then, of course, we're going to use Agrax Earthshade, because why not? We're going to give the tree a coat of that, making sure we do not go over the fence or anything else that we have already painted. And then we're going to switch to Monster Brown, and we're just going to do a dry brush over the whole thing. And then once that is done, we just need to do the grass around the base again the same way as we did on the other walls. And that is the whole thing done, and that is the finished result. As you can see, very quick, very easy. If you've got a lot of walls and fences and stuff, it's really not interesting to paint that sort of thing, especially in bulk. So this is a really good way to get stuff looking good on the tabletop really, really quickly. I hope you have found the video useful. I appreciate it's not the most in-depth type of painting, and I'm sure many of you would already know how to do this. So this was the original small structure, and I applied exactly the same techniques to the large structure, which comprises a tower, a house, and a joining element. You could build these as two separate structures, and I built this a long time ago, and if I'd been thinking more about it at the time, I might have magnetized this central structure so that I could break it into smaller structures if I needed to. But it is what it is. It is one large structure, and I used the same very simple techniques. You can see that the roof tiles have the same red and orange dry brush. The wood is literally just a base wood colour, an Agrax Earthshade wash, and then a highlight of a brighter brown. And I've used exactly the same plaster technique, and I think that's what sells this particular paint job, because all of the stone elements are literally Mechanica Standard Grey, Nuln Oil, and then an Ulthuan Grey dry brush over the top. So they're really basic. You get a nice high contrast finish, but you're not winning any awards with that. But I think when you combine it with the technique that I used for painting the plaster, you get a pretty nice result. Even using the very simple techniques that I showed in my previous videos, this still took quite a long time. It is a large structure, lots of dry brushing, and lots of gradual building up of layers. It was still quicker than it might have been, and it's still a quick paint job compared to many other paint jobs that you could do on it. But it was still quite time consuming and really quite boring to paint. But I am very pleased with the result. And I will show you this structure when you add in the wall elements, which I did keep separate, with the moving gates. These gates do have hinges. So there you go. You can have a courtyard on the front with the doors open or shut, however you want it. And then you have this separate structure which you can stick on the top if you want to add some extra height. You can stick it inside the courtyard like a little latrine or something, or you can put it outside as a groundskeeper's cottage. Whatever you want to do. And I'm pretty happy with that. That's going to look decent on the tabletop without needing to do lots of really complicated painting techniques on it. And this is a pretty large structure as well. It works pretty well with all kinds of different miniatures. I've got some examples here. We've got this squirrel from Burrows and Badgers. You can see she can fire her wand from the parapet. Got this wizard from Reaper. This is one of their metal miniatures. Got this zombie from Dungeons and Dragons, because every good fortified manor should have a zombie guard dog. We have a member of the militia from the old Bretonnian set from Games Workshop. Perfectly suited to being up here, raining arrows upon the foe. And finally, we have one of the newer Games Workshop miniatures with the slightly oversized size creep that has come into their miniatures in recent years. This is, of course, Slambo. And he's intimidating enough to fill the courtyard by himself. The walls and fences, I used the same Mechanica Standard Grey Nuln Oil Ulthuan dry brush just to get a high contrast finish on the walls and to get it done really, really quickly. And these really are very, very nice. They're incredibly detailed for walls. And you can go to town on these if you really want to. You can do much more detailed painting jobs than I have done. But my aim, as always, is to get stuff painted really, really quickly. You will notice there are a few skulls on these walls because Games Workshop cannot help themselves. Regardless of what they are making, they will put skulls on them. These walls and fences, I can see them getting a lot of use in Elder Scrolls, but also very much for burrows and badgers. I think they have that sort of slightly whimsical feel to it. There is a goblin on that one. There's a goblin peeping out of a hole. But that's okay. Who's to say there aren't goblins in the world of burrows and badgers? But yeah, they have a slightly whimsical look to them, partly due to the oversimplified way I've painted them, I guess. But that slightly whimsical English countryside look that they have is going to work very well for burrows and badgers. The only negative really is the human skulls, because in a world of anthropomorphic animals, it's weird that there are human skulls kicking about. That is also a minor problem for the walls of the manor house, because there are some human skeletons around the manor house, and there are also 2 human statues on either side of the main gates. But I guess humans make statues of animals all the time, so why wouldn't anthropomorphic animals make statues of humans? Discuss in the comments. But there we go, that's all of the walls and fences, and you can see they provide fantastic cover for my little squirrel. And just to show you what I mean about the statues of the human figures, there is a statue on each side of the gate on these wall sections. However, that's down to the way that I made them. Those statues are separate elements. You can just not attach them, and then you just have like a little stone buttress instead supporting the wall. So, you know, they're not absolutely essential to have. But I'm okay to overlook that for the sake of being able to use all this cool terrain with my burrows and badgers. So there we go, that is just a quick look at the Games Workshop Fortified Manor and how I painted it up as quickly as I possibly could. I do think this is a really good set. This, I think, is one of my favourite terrain pieces that I own, and even with this simple paint scheme, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think it looks great, and I can see it getting a lot of use. Sorry this has been a slightly weird video and perhaps not of interest to many people, but if you have found it interesting, then do please consider pressing that like button and subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon.